Hello, hello, and welcome to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. And today we are starting up a new series. Today we are kicking it old school and bringing out The Legend of Zelda. Now, if you're new to the channel, welcome. This channel is equal parts challenge series and podcast, where I kind of break down different aspects of a game as well as its development
Open your
cycle
eyes.
or ideologies to really showcase what went into the creation of them
Open your
and
eyes.
how they've been received. If you've been here a while, you
Wake
know
up,
what you're up
Link.
against. Today, I have the beginning of a very special challenge, one that I have been thinking about and planning since this channel in general has actually been created, but it's one that I never really had the guts to go through with. It was something that was difficult to really put together. So, without further ado, the Breath of the Wild 3-weapon challenge begins now. Now, the rules of this challenge are as follows. I must only use 3 weapons for the entire duration of the game. Those 3 weapons are going to be the Bow of Light, the Hylian Shield, and the Master Sword. One of each category. All other items are welcome to be used, but that only means so much. If it fits under one of the 3 categories, like a pot lid would fit under a shield, it's not a viable tool. Same thing with
That
torches being
is a
counted
Sheikah's
as a
slate.
shield, or as
Take
a
it.
sword.
It will help guide you after your
Thus,
long slumber.
we end up with a relatively open minded version of The Legend of Zelda's approach. The goal of this is to make sure, or is to, I suppose, change up how the game functions. See, back, I suppose it's been about 2.5 years now since The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was released. And don't get me wrong, it is an amazing game. But if you know Tears of the Kingdom, you know they've got a little bit of a problem with the creation aspect. People rather quickly realized that it was possible to create the bike. The bike is a catch-all term
Hold the
for
Sheikah's
the
slate
hover
up
bike,
to the pedestal.
the tool that
That
allows
will
people to
show you the
traverse
way.
the entire world in relatively no time at all. And the issue with it becomes that the bike was too easy to use, ironically enough. The average player tended to focus very heavily on just utilizing this one tool to its absolute maximum efficiency. And to be fair, that is the point of the creative aspect of the game. You're allowed to create
Link,
tools that will guide you
you are the
through
light.
that world to
Our
make
light.
traversal and
That
combat
must shine upon
more
Hyrule once
free
again.
form. But
Now go.
the freeform aspect of this new system left a lot to be desired. It became too broken, shall we say, because you've heard the arguments, I'm sure, of who would win in a fight, so and so or Batman with prep time, and the reality is most of the people would say it was Batman with prep time. I argue that Batman would still lose to Phineas and Ferb, but that's beside the point. Anywho, Link has much the same mentality applied to him in that version of the game because prep time is his bread and butter in Tears of the Kingdom. Breath of the Wild, however, had a little bit more of a limited approach in which you had gained certain tools that were meant to boost the player over time. This being stuff like the Sheikah slate, the various weapons that would slowly but surely upgrade and show off new tools throughout the game were all part of the process for this game. So Why am I only picking 3 weapons then? Isn't that the whole point of having Zelda be as open-ended as it is? Well, yes, that is the whole point. But I'm more looking back at older Zelda. See, Legend of Zelda can be loosely broken up into 5 categories for the entire franchise. This being the old school top-down 2D style. Think the original Link to the Past. You could even go so far as to say games like Minish Cap, Spirit Tracks, Phantom Hourglass. They all tie into this mentality, this system. The mentality and system of video games that tie directly around this are based primarily on combat and puzzle solving. That is the Legend of Zelda's 2D core identity is based around puzzle solving. Then we get into the second batch. This would be the multiplayer games. Four Swords Adventures, Triforce Heroes. These 3 games are entirely dependent on the 2D top-down style, but are done in a way that allows the player to have a little bit more, shall we say, hijinks. It allows for the players to mess around a little bit more with some more complex tools in a sometimes a competitive or cooperative sense. What would it be like to use the Fire Rod and the Pegasus boots at the same time, for example? The third is the spin-offs. These are games that tie their roots back to Zelda, like the core series, but don't necessarily take the time to
Head
really
for the point marked
showcase
on the map in your Sheikah
what
slate.
each game is like in a more unique sense. For example, we have the CDI games. These are spin-offs, if ever there was one, and most people would say they don't count as Zelda. Unfortunately, I have to include it as a this was a thing, but it's not something that people generally enjoy. The next category that really ties into it are stuff like Hyrule Warriors or Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land in Japan. These games tie back to Zelda in a way, but are they tend to leave out a majority of what makes Zelda Zelda, instead opting for either the bullet hell gameplay or the Dynasty Warriors franchise gameplay style, with a little bit of Zelda flair thrown on top. This is the crux of that side of game. There are 2 more. 3D Zelda. This is like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, Skyward Sword. They take a much more heavy approach to storytelling. They take a much more direct approach to storytelling. They take it to its world building. And in a way, this is probably what most of us think of when we think Zelda. Because Wind Waker was a masterclass of open world design at the time of its creation. But you also have games like Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time, both of which were incredibly important to the development of video games at the time of their creation. You could even look at Skyward Sword and its use of the Wii Motion Plus and how motion-based video games could function more coherently than a lot of people would originally think of. Zelda is innovation. They always look at what has come before and find ways to make it bigger, better, and sometimes a little bit more unique. Where does this all tie in, however? Breath of the Wild was the first of what I would call the modern Zelda. This modern Zelda is the open world-esque Zelda, typically from a 3D perspective. Now, there are 3 games in the modern Zelda category, that being Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and Echoes of Wisdom. Now, Breath of the Wild's
You
whole
have been
identity
asleep
was that
for the past
you
100
see that
years.
mountain off in the distance, you want to go
The
for it.
beast.
Have fun, go play,
When the
guys.
beast regains its
Have
true power,
just
this world will face its
explore.
end.
Enjoy the world to the best of your capabilities because that's what this is. Exploration. And honestly, I think it works wonderfully. Tears of the Kingdom took everything Breath of the Wild was and said, hey,
You must
you need
hurry
better
then,
ways of traversing than walking. Sure, you can get a horse, but is
before
that
it's
really
too
the
late.
peak of movement? The answer was absolutely not. And so the two of them kind of have a little bit of a back and forth between them. Zelda's more modern age has been tied back to what would Zelda be like if the original was made in the modern era? And to be fair, I agree with that mentality. I think that there's a lot that could be done with Zelda now that we couldn't before. And with the change in technology over the last 20 years, you can see very quickly how much the series has changed from game to game. Breath of the Wild is a reimagining of older Zeldas. And so I have no issue in saying that this is one of the more open-ended and unique ways going about this world and this gameplay style. But it is still not without its flaws, and that will become apparent in the near future. For now, we've got a couple major tasks to handle. The first of which is we need tools. Specifically, we're going to go to the Omanau Shrine. The Omanau Shrine is the Magnesis Shrine, if my memory serves. And the goal of this shrine is to effectively have the tutorial on the Magnesis rune. I I did mention that I've only allowed 3 weapons, but that's not entirely the case. I am allowed to use runes to whatever effect I can, be it the camera rune, the magnesis, bombs, anything that is not classified as one of the 3 weapon types is fair game. So, there is going to be a lot of bonking things with metal objects and a lot of kabooms in this run. Just because, as far as runes go, those are the 2 that are the most open-ended as far as player autonomy is concerned. The goal of these particular runes is you're playing the game, have fun. These are in infinite supply. Just go for it. Now, magnesis is one that can work wonderfully in certain circumstances and poorly in others. I believe that the Ultra Hand did magnesis much better than magnesis did. But there's a reason behind that. First things first is that magnesis locks all objects to a specific XY mentality. They can spin, but they're much more limited in scope as far as what can be accomplished with standard magnesis. That is, until we get the full grasp of what it's capable. Magnesis runes are all about using the space to your advantage. But large heavy objects like this door here can make nice easy bridges, can bonk enemies pretty reasonably, but it can't be used as a shield, which, guess what? Magnesis is going to be my primary shield for this run. Typically in the form of holding boulders in front of my face and hoping that enemies don't decide to go around it. The second major tool that's going to be useful is the bomb rune. Primary offensive capability, that's really all it is. Anywho, I figured I would leave this in here as a this is what happens at the end of every single shrine, because realistically, we can't have this 24/7 every single day, or every single time I boot this up, watch this same one cutscene. I'm showing it once, this happens every time, go with it. Anywho, with all of that, we're going to be heading into our next major location here, which is going to be the Bomb Shrine. And then we'll get into the specifics of how to get the last two runes. Because, unfortunately, the last couple of runes are going to be more, I suppose, more open-ended as far as how you can get to them. But for the purposes of this run, there's one I want to have, or one specific system that I want to have access to for this right from the get-go. So, Breath of the Wild, unlike its predecessors, deals with different heat in a more open-ended way. And stuff like Ocarina of Time, where you needed the Goron tunic to be able to enter Death Mountain Crater, was important for the time. It showed that the video games were growing and becoming more aware of certain locations being of different temperatures, different gradients, that kind of stuff. But the big kicker to this whole circumstance is that in Breath of the Wild, you're taking that same system and you're applying it more broadly. You can climb the Hebra Mountains in nothing but your underwear, but you need to have something to keep you warm. Be that a special food that you create, a torch, a flaming sword, which personally I like the flame sword idea, but that's neither here nor there. Or, and this one's kind of one of the bigger ones, armor. Different armor have different effects. There's armor that handles high heat, armor that handles too cold, there is armor that handles flame, water, you name it. And there's armor that handles lightning storms. There is an armor for everything. And thus, armor is a huge component of what actually makes Breath of the Wild's movement and traversal so unique, in that every single location has multiple options to get away from what's challenging you. For example, Gerudo Desert, you can travel at night. You can travel and jump from shadow patch to shadow patch. You can create food that keeps you cool. You can create all sorts of different options are available. But the big kicker is that the option is there for you to use more simplistic means as well, like collecting special armors that you throw it on and set it and forget it kind of mentalities. And sometimes this is good, sometimes it isn't. All depends on the player's perspective and how much you want to engage with the game's systems. And the game's systems are what makes Breath of the Wild so unique compared to the rest of Zelda. There are 1,000,001 ways to play Zelda Breath of the Wild. You just have to find them. Anywho, among all of the different aspects and choices that I have to make throughout this series in general, something that I don't think that gets touched in on enough about Zelda Breath of the Wild's world and its opening actually comes in the form of Breath of the Wild tutorial. So, if you have noticed, and I think I mentioned it earlier, the tutorial area, the Great Plateau, is one very small fraction, maybe 1/20th the size of Hyrule as a whole. And it is in the exact shape and rough development and the same size as what all of Hyrule Field was in Ocarina of Time. This means, without going too far into it, that the game has attempted to, I guess, multiply the size of the world by 20. That's no small feat, and something that I personally believe is a testament to the game design. That not only were they able to make a world of that size, but also that the world that was created was significantly more full of life than anything we had seen prior. Now, looking at Ocarina of Time's world, most of it was just an empty field. If you weren't out in the middle of the night, there was next to nothing that was actually there to stop you. It was just run from one end to the other. You needed a horse because otherwise it was going to be, what, 5, 10 minutes just trudging across the mountains, or across the rolling hills, the green fields, and that was it. Breath of the Wild took that same mentality and said our first section is going to be none other than the same size, but we're going to have it be a micro world of everything that we're expected to come across in the game. You're going to have some form of high heat in the form of fires. You're going to see a guardian or two. You are going to see numerous weapons. You're going to be introduced to swimming. You're going to be introduced to Koroks. You're going to be introduced to everything, even down to mud and quicksand is all accounted for in the Great Plateau. The only thing that isn't accounted for is the fact that Death Mountain lights you on fire every time you walk there. But comparing what Death Mountain does to what the Great Plateau or the Hebra Mountains or any other really location at all in Breath of the Wild, it's night and day, but it's a huge undertaking to make this world, let alone make it lived in. And that's something that I don't believe very many games, even today, would be able to make happen to this degree. Note, I say very many. There are some out there that do. Some like The Witcher from CD Projekt Red come to mind. But the vast majority of games prior to this did not have the power nor the drive, I don't believe, to make a fully fleshed out world like this. So, I personally love that about Breath of the Wild, and by extension, Tears of the Kingdom. My biggest complaint about Tears of the Kingdom actually comes from the world itself. So, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are very similar in terms of scope. If you look at Breath of the Wild's map, it is a fairly sizable space. Tears of the Kingdom said, hey, let's take that space and triple it in the form of the underground or the depths, as they call it. And that was great. You had an underground that was the same size map as what Breath of the Wild had. And then you had the Sky World, which was undercooked at best. But these areas brought so much more to the table that it could be considered its own biome, its own location in and of itself. And so I believe that innovation in Zelda is pretty well the biggest defining feature of the entire franchise. If you look all the way back to the original Zelda, hear me out. most of the games that were made prior to the original Zelda had one of two things in mind. Either it was a top-down game that was meant to be played in one sitting, or it was a side-scroller like Mario or what have you. It was effectively one of these two basic mentalities, but it always had to be done in one sitting. The original Zelda said no, let's take this and put it on its head a little bit. Let's make a game that can't be beaten in one sitting. How close was that to hitting me? Okay, pretty close. Definitely glad that I had the hill there. Um, so I have to take a quick detour. I need spicy peppers. And we're gonna go hunting next. Um, as I was saying, the original Zelda was meant to be explorative in nature, allowing the player to experience the world and grow with the game. The game's more difficult areas you wouldn't be able to reach without certain upgrades, or without X number of hearts to keep you from getting one-shot by the enemies. And then you take Zelda 2, which on its own is considered one of the black sheeps of the entire series. So they tried to take a top-down game and turn the dungeons into side-scrollers, allowing for more in-depth combat. So already they're trying to innovate what the game could consist of. You turn to the Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and they are introducing the dual world. They're introducing weather effects. They are introducing really the lore of the Master Sword and everything in and of it, and the lore of Hyrule as a whole. And it only got more chaotic and impressive from there, as far as each individual game bringing something more than what came before. So, why do I mention it as what came before? Look at the Oracle games. Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons. One controlling time, the other controlling weather. Your puzzles are directly tied to that. What about your height? Well, we can deal with that with the Minish Cap. Have your character be either a tiny Picori or a regular-sized human. How about we create a massive dungeon? Something that every time you go into it will change and have something more to offer. Well, you've just mentioned Spirit Tracks and, well, Phantom Hourglass, more so, in how every time you enter the ocean or Temple of the Ocean King, you end up going just a little bit deeper, a little bit farther, and the new tools you've gained make the game easier to get through those areas a second time. Innovation is Zelda. And unlike certain franchises that come to mind, like Mario, for example, every game goes forward with this mentality of innovation, something new, something different. To the point where Zelda today, the newest games, are unrecognizable to their originals, their roots. And so, I believe that if ever there was a franchise that would be endless, that would stand the test of time, it is The Legend of Zelda in general. Now, Breath of the Wild was an experimental phase. And yeah, I think that there are many people who would agree with my statement. It's the first one that really introduced stuff like cooking, and it is the first one that really tried to make it so that every single enemy had its own unique drops, that had a full-on weather system for each different location that wasn't just, hey, you are now in a area that is in perpetual rainstorms until you figure out how to stop it. It is every area has dynamic weather that changes with the time of day, and it's amazing and immaculate what they were able to concoct and put together. But I think what is if anything, more impressive than what they managed with the creation of Zelda Breath of the Wild is what the community has managed. So, Zelda has always been, shall we say, player friendly. It had became a sandbox for many players where you get to play the game however you want. Do what you feel is the next logical step. Do you believe that you need to take some time to heal or gear up, do a side quest to prepare for future events? Or are you, like me, going to rush head on into the main quest? Both options have their what you just shot a bomb out of my hands. I gotta say that's pretty impressive. Are you like me and gonna rush forward and actually and do the main quest right away? Or is there something more that you, the player, could get out of this? Ultimately, every single option has a legitimate purpose, and there's no right or wrong answer. Breath of the Wild took that mentality to the absolute extreme. Barring the Great Plateau and the four shrines held within, the rest of the world is play as you go. Do what you need to do to succeed. And I believe that that is a huge testament to their game design. The Once the Great Plateau, their tutorial area, is complete, you're free to venture wherever your heart may take you. If you decide that it's not really your thing to go over to the Hebra Mountains and you're more interested in seeing how the Gorons are doing, off to Death Mountain you go. If you're more interested in finding the great fairies strewn across the world, then you have nothing holding you back. Just go for it. What about the Akala region? It's an area that we haven't gotten much in terms of defining features for up to this point. It's a new word, something that we have never come across prior. Well, maybe we should go over there next instead. Each of these options, ow, ties back to what Zelda's core thesis is, which is effectively freedom. Do what you feel you need to do next. I almost got clocked by him. That would have been funny. And possibly terrifying, depending on how you look at it. Ah, yes. The drop the bomb and boom. I don't know. Working on a running verbiage for that is probably going to be one of the more minor tools that I use. It's going to be a more consistent one, but the idea behind it is just that the enemies are aggressive enough that you won't need to necessarily avoid, or you can just drop a bomb behind you and off you go. But it's something that is going to be pretty consistent as well. Anyways, we're just gonna drop this here. Gravity is also going to be a huge friend of ours. Albeit, the game itself, aside from magnesis, most of the game doesn't have much in terms of gravity-based puzzles that I am aware of. I'm sure that I am going to find something and it's going to be ridiculously simple and something I never really caught or never really stood out to me prior. But for now, we're going to say that it's not that big of a task, shall we say, or not influencing the main gameplay enough to be notable outside of a couple, we'll say it, falling rocks here and there. Anyways, our next and third shrine is going to be the Stasis Shrine. Each of the 4 runes in main gameplay have massive implications for how the game itself functions. The one that always got me thinking the most was ironically Cryonis. The ability to cross bodies of water by placing a pillar, so to speak, and crossing it block by block is admittedly a little on the slow side compared to a lot of people's desire for traversal methods. But for myself, this relatively simple traversal method ends up doing a lot in terms of just opening up the world. I've ended up climbing up entire waterfalls off to the side for the sake of just, I wonder if I can get over here. The second major rule is that the Cryonis rune in general meant that it didn't necessarily matter what your end goal was as long as you knew where you were starting. Stasis is easily one of the most exploitable versions, or exploitable runes in the game, because it allows the player to be able to launch objects from A to B and had an entire series of Korok puzzles devoted to it. But the big, I suppose, problem that came from this was that the stasis was not versatile enough. But what is incredibly versatile is what I like to call the lock, or the magnesis trick. By placing an item that is made of metal on top of another item that is too heavy to move, you can, in fact, move said item because the game ceases to do any mass calculations after the object in question is acted upon by more than one outside force. The easiest way to describe it is that video games have to run on a system, whatever that system ends up being. Sometimes the math is as simplistic as, oh, we have a single force link is 60 kilos, he is putting his all into it, he can do this much movement. And that's all there is to it. But once you add extra sources of movement, of force on an object, it becomes a lot more difficult to find a easy way to move the object that is mathematically correct. So instead of doing any calculations at all, the devs opted for, if there are more than one option available or more than one input, the weight of the object in question that you're trying to move is now 0. It can no longer be can be acted upon freely. This is going to be one of, if not the most consistently used oversight or glitch, depending on which version of the word you'd prefer, to show up in this entire mini-series. Because I believe that the fact that it exists is enough to say that I can use it, but it is not so complex as to be, how do I put it? Ow. Hot. It's not so complex that that anybody, or that people can't access it. How do I put this in easy words? Effectively, what I am trying to get at is that a lot of the item duplication glitches, while they are simple, for example, are something that not all players are going to be able to accomplish. But due to the effectiveness and ease of use of this particular glitch, I'm saying that it is perfectly fine, because anybody, provided they understand how the system works, can do the thing. There we go. That's the way of putting it. And with that, we now have the fourth and potentially final rune that we are going to be able to access. There is going to be a attempt at getting the, well, I suppose, 6th rune, the camera rune. But I'll be honest, I'm not really sure if I can get it. Due to the nature of the game and how open-ended a lot of the circumstances that we're going to be dealing with are, it's difficult at times to assess what is going to be possible from the outset. There are some things, like the ability to access the divine beasts, that I flat out believe I can't. I might be able to get to Van Naboris, but that might be the only one I can beat prior to the events of the final boss gauntlet. But aside from Van Naboris, the others are questionable at best, because you need thunder arrows to access the divine beast Varuda. You need the ability to use arrows in general inside of Varudanya. There is a target practice range before you even have a chance to challenge Valmeadow. So each of the various divine beasts have a lot more barriers of entry than certain other weapons and tools will get. And I'll be honest, there are other things that I have no idea if I'll be able to complete, simply because of not having certain tools at my disposal. With all of that in mind, we're going to make a beeline for the finale of this particular video. Make an X where the lines meet, that is where you will find the old man. It's a pretty simplistic puzzle, a little bit of spatial reasoning. And again, one of those beautiful moments that the game really doesn't try to hide from you. It's trying to encourage reasoning in different ways. Sometimes it's looking at geography. Sometimes it's looking at, ooh, there's a shiny spot off in the distance. Everything has a purpose in this game. And I'll be amiss to say that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is not well crafted. I think the biggest issue with Tears of the Kingdom's world comes in the form of that bike. Now, the bike is a relatively simple tool. It's a hover bike. You traverse the world at record speeds. As long as you have battery, it's fair game, right? The issue becomes that if every single problem can be solved with one tool, then all other tools fall by the wayside. The Ultra Hand being the tool that allows Link to access the, shall we say, customization options, is far and away one of Link's most powerful abilities ever. Like, to put it into perspective, in, I suppose it was like 2010, 2012-ish, when the 25th anniversary of Zelda came out with Skyward Sword, that we received some, middling tools in general. But one of the tools was just a jar that had wind in it, or a wind jar. And that was functional. It did what it was intended to do. But to compare a gust of wind to the ability to create mechs, tanks, cars, the ability to create hover bikes, to create even just a bridge across a gap, because why wouldn't you make a bridge out of it? I think speaks volumes to, again, just how far development has gone, but how the various mechanics that get involved in Legend of Zelda have evolved to become even more powerful than they were ever intended to be back in the day of their inception. So, with that in mind, the restrictions I have set are effectively a more of an endurance test mentality than anything. I believe that it is possible to beat the game with only the rules in mind. But what makes the challenge difficult is that because the tools, ironically, limit a bulk of Link's damage dealing capabilities, we're effectively going to treat the entire game as if it were Eventide Island, where the whole goal was to beat the Shrine Challenge without the use of the gear that had gotten Link so far to begin with. And honestly, Eventide Island is one of my favorite challenges that came up in Breath of the Wild altogether. The idea that you are working with only the resources you find on the island. You are stuck until you figure it out. It's a amazing use of a space. Not exactly the type of challenge that I think should be repeated too often, but it is the type of challenge that I believe could... It made an impression, to say the least. And I truly believe that Eventide Island is probably one of the most simplistic to implement and most difficult to actually do properly. Anyways, I'm gonna take a quick break from the mic here, as old man here has something to say.
Well done there, young one. Now then, the time has come to show you who I truly am. I was King Rome Bosphoramus Hyrule. I was the last leader of Hyrule, a kingdom which no longer exists. The Great Calamity was merciless. It devastated everything in its path, lo, a century ago. It was then that my life was taken away from me. And since that time, here I have remained in spirit form. I did not think it wise to overwhelm you while your memory was still fragile. So rather than that, I thought it best to assume a temporary form. Forgive me. I think you are now ready. Ready to hear what happened 100 years ago. To know Calamity Ganon's true form, one must know the story from an age long past. The Demon King was born into this kingdom, but his transformation into malice created the horror you see now. Stories of Ganon were passed from generation to generation in the form of legends and fairy tales. But there was also a prophecy. The signs of a resurrection of Calamity Ganon are clear, and the power to oppose it lies dormant beneath the ground. We decided to heed the prophecy and began excavating large areas of land. It wasn't long before we discovered several ancient relics made by the hands of our distant ancestors. These relics, the divine beasts, were giant machines piloted by warriors. We also found the Guardians, an army of mechanical soldiers who fought autonomously. This coincided with ancient legends, oft repeated throughout our land. We also learned of a princess with a sacred power, and her appointed knight, chosen by the sword that seals the darkness. It was they who sealed Ganon away using the power of these ancient relics. 100 years ago, there was a princess set to inherit a sacred power and a skilled knight at her side. It was clear that we must follow our ancestors' path. We selected 4 skilled individuals from across Hyrule and tasked them with the duty of piloting the divine beasts. With the princess as their commander, we dubbed these pilots champions, a name that would solidify their unique bond. The princess, her appointed knight, and the rest of the champions were on the brink of sealing away Ganon. But nay. Ganon was cunning, and he responded with a plan beyond our imagining. He appeared from deep below Hyrule Castle, seized control of the Guardians and the Divine Beasts, and turned them against us. The champions lost their lives, those residing in the castle as well. The appointed knight, bravely collapsed while defending the princess. And thus, the kingdom of Hyrule was devastated absolutely by Calamity Ganon. However, the princess survived to face Ganon alone.
Link, you are our final hope. The fate of Hyrule rests with you.
That princess was my own daughter, my dear Zelda. And the courageous knight who protected her right up to the very end. That knight was none other than you, Link. You fought valiantly when your fate took an unfortunate turn. And then, you were taken to the Shrine of Resurrection. Here you now stand, revitalized 100 years later. The words of guidance you have been hearing since your awakening are from Princess Zelda herself. Even now, as she works to restrain Ganon from within Hyrule Castle, she calls out for your help. However, my daughter's power will soon be exhausted. Once that happens, Ganon will freely regenerate himself, and nothing will stop him from consuming our land. Considering that I could not save my own kingdom, I have no right to ask this of you, Link. But I am powerless here. You must save her, my daughter, and do whatever it takes to annihilate Ganon. Somehow, Ganon has maintained control over all 4 divine beasts, as well as those guardians swarming around Hyrule Castle. I believe it would be quite reckless for you to head directly to the castle at this point. I suggest that you make your way east out to one of the villages in the wilderness. Follow the road out to Kakariko Village. There you will find the Elder Impa. She will tell you more about the path that lies ahead. Consult the map on your Sheikah slate for the precise location of Kakariko Village. Make your way past the twin summits of the dueling peaks. From there, follow the road as it proceeds north.
Anywho, that is effectively the story of Breath of the Wild in a nutshell. The entire world has been ravaged by Ganon. And now, 100 years after his resurrection, your goal is as clear as mud. You must save Hyrule. Whatever's left of it, at least. Oh, I wonder what's in here. Yeah. No, I don't want... No, I don't want that. Anyways, we're just gonna fly on out of here. I forgot to get my stuff. Alright, we're gonna get one last final item. 4 spirit orbs in exchange for 1 heart container. This is going to happen a fair bit during this run. So, strap in. Anyways, if you like what you see, drop a like, leave subscribe. We'll catch you next time. Until then, be good to one another and have a good one.